Welcome, everybody, to this very special edition of Unfinished Business Television. I am your host, Andre Joseph H. Epics Productions, and always the main man himself, Mr. Jeff Galashaw. Say hello.
Hello. As you can see, I am Jeff Galashaw, and again, welcome to this episode of Unfinished Business Television. Sorry for my reading. My eyes aren't what they used to be. When your screen is filled, it can only mean one thing. We have a special guest. As you can see, you may not recognize him, but he is a man whose resume as a director truly shows he's a journeyman director. He has directed feature films, documentaries, televisions, and short films. His work were practically my babysitters and some of my favorite films growing up as a kid and as a teen, and still hold special memories for not only me, but millions of people who have seen his films. The most famous, and for some, infamous of which is Troop Beverly Hills, and a little indie production titled Revenge of the Nerds. We're lucky and blessed to have another gem on the show, director JEFF KANEW. And thank you for being here today.
I'm here. You can call me Canoe.
Okay, Canoe, sorry.
Because my 8th grade social studies teacher called me Canoe, and I didn't like it.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
That's so, it. Jeff, we followed you. Yes, you, sir. Mr. Canoe, Mr. Galashaw.
I won't do that anymore. But it is pissing me off that I see two guys with dark hair and dark beards, and then I see Santa Claus in the upper right-hand corner.
I already got my grays going in, so don't worry.
I got plenty of them, trust me.
I feel better now. All right, come on, stop screwing around. Let's do this.
So, we'd like to always ask everybody how they got started in the industry. In your case, you started as an editor and you did a documentary film called Black Rodeo in 1972. So what got you into the film industry to begin with?
Okay, so I'll go back and you can tell me if I'm rambling right here. So when I was 17, I had just applied to colleges. I didn't have any idea what I wanted to be, but it had nothing to do with film. I had a band. I wanted to be a rock star. I was writing songs, and my father died, and my mother now had to go to work, and she had never worked before because back in that era, women didn't work that much as part of their normal life. And a neighbor that lived down the block from me, I guess felt sorry for me because my father died, whatever. And he offered me a job, part-time and summers at the United Artists, a movie company where he was an executive. And I said no, because I was working at the Corvettes, kind of like Target. And I was in the record department, so I could play whatever records I wanted all day long. So there's no way I'm commuting to New York to be an office boy in a movie company, not interested. And my mother said, "You're doing it." So I had to do it. So I became a commuter for that summer, and I worked at this movie company, and I thought it was fine. I mean, it wasn't what I wanted to do with my life, but we got to watch movies. That occasionally I got to see Dr. No and a few other things like that. And then Hard Day's Night was coming out, and I started college while I was working part-time at that job, and I actually liked the job better than I liked college. So about 2.5 years later, I got kicked out of college, and then I started to work full time. So that's kind of how I got into the movie business. But I was really not interested, and I was still trying to write songs and be in the music business, but not successfully. And then little by little, they put me in this department called the trailer department, where they had a man who was producing trailers for their films. Because couple of years prior to that, maybe 64 or 5, all movie trailers were made by a company called National Screen Service. And they did all the trailers for free. In exchange, they got to rent the trailers, these little, 400-foot rolls of film, to the theaters. And that was their main source of income, renting trailers to theaters in exchange for doing the trailers creatively for free. So all the trailers kind of looked alike. If you look back at the trailers of that era, they have a lot of wipes and title cards, and it's always 5 years in the making, cast of thousands, things like that. So there was just change happening just at the time that I got involved in the world of movie trailers. And so that was really my first job. I worked for their trailer company, and then at a certain point, which I won't get into because it's probably too complicated, but I was making $93.25 a week, and it was the Vietnam War, and I needed to get married not to go to Vietnam. So in order to get married, I needed a raise. I wanted to get up to a $103.25 a week, and my boss said no. So I got mad and quit. So now I'm not in the trailer business anymore, but I had a friend who was also like a frustrated doo-wop star that wasn't. And he said to me, he was from Brooklyn. He said to me, start your own trailer company. I said, what are you talking about? I'm fucking 20 years old. Nobody's going to give me trailers to do, you know, without being associated with a big company. He said, come on, you could do it. You could do it. So I had nothing. I had no other choice. So we rented an editing room, and I declared myself a trailer guy. And because there were a couple of other younger guys working for United Artists, for example, I got one assignment to do a trailer for much less than they were paying everybody else. But for me, I didn't have big expenses, so why not? So I did a trailer on a movie called A Man and a Woman, with this French Claude Lelouch movie that was coming out. And I really loved the movie, and I did a good job on the trailer. And instead of paying $20,000 or whatever they paid for the trailer, they paid me $1,500. But so what? My expenses were low. So that was my first independent trailer job. And then luckily, over the next few years, I built that up almost by accident into a successful independent trailer company. And for the next 10 years, that's what I did. Make movie trailers, and I made good money. And during that process, several things happened. I made a documentary called Black Rodeo, which was a great experience, although whatever it cost me to make it, I never got any back. I would film little things that would, you know, be part of the trailer, like Woody Allen talking to me at his moviola while he was working on Bananas or Everything You Want to Know About Sex or Sleeper. And I would ask him questions and then intercut that with scenes from the movie. And that was the trailer for Woody stuff. And I ended up doing, over the course of the next 10, 11 years, like 400 trailers. Wow. And I did Rocky, and I did Cuckoo's Nest, and I did All the President's Men. But in 1967, because I was young, the client that was releasing a movie that had no big stars and a lot of music, and they hired me to do this movie. It turned out to be The Graduate. And that was a big career breakthrough for me, because then it was like, hey, let's get the guy that did The Graduate trailer. See, I tell you, I go on and on and on, and you might have to edit.
Well, you know, I want to ask you a question about the trailer thing, because, yeah, you basically did most of the new Hollywood era trailers of that time. But I had a question about the Rocky trailer, because I read somewhere when you were assigned that they didn't want any of the boxing scenes, from what I heard.
Yes, they said, stay away from the boxing. Boxing pictures don't sell. So they had this box, and that's why they made the whole movie for like $900,000. Because they didn't think it would sell. So stay away from the boxing. So there was none of the actual fight between him and Apollo Creed in the trailer. And there was a little training stuff and punching the side of beef and running. And that was okay, but no actual boxing. And so it was all about the character of Rocky and Adrian. And the copy line that the studio came up with was, his whole life was 1,000,000 to 1 shot. So they sold it on that, and it clicked, it worked. Stallone, who was a nobody before that, he had done one movie called The Lords of Flatbush, where, you know, it was a small, low-budget movie about guys in Brooklyn, and his name was Stanley Yuccamanelli or something like that. And, you know, he talked like Stallone, you know, only sound kind of dumb. So I thought, what if I use him to narrate the trailer? And he liked that idea. So he came over, and I had, hey, this is Stanley from the Lords of Flatbush. You know, I want you to come see my movie. I'm a big star. I'm going to be a big star. So that was the trailer for Lords of Flatbush. And then he was a big star because of Rocky. So that happened. So what was the question?
No, that actually was kind of my question, was, you know, how they just didn't want any of the boxing scenes in there. That's pretty crazy, yeah, but it was effective.
Yeah, and you know, there was like a little internal fight at the United Artists marketing, because one of the executives said, well, we got to put the boxing. And the other guy said, we got to stay away from the boxing. And there were often those kind of discussions that would have how to position a movie. And that was one of them.
Wow.
Should I tell another story?
Go
Please
for it.
do.
Yes,
Yeah, go for
definitely.
It's a Stallone story. I hope he never sees this. He'll think I'm making fun of him, which I'm not.
I don't know if he pays attention to us.
He's probably watching right now.
Well, if he does, come on the show. I want to talk about Nighthawks.
No. Okay. I was flying from New York to LA for some reason just before Rocky opened. It hadn't opened yet, but it was about to. And now the studio had confidence in it. So they were sending Stallone out to LA, I guess, to do some PR. And we happened to bump into each other on the plane. So I said, hey, what are you doing? He said, oh, I'm going out to LA and do some interviews. So I was thinking, oh, he sounds so dumb. Maybe he shouldn't do interviews. So I said, hey, Sly, maybe you should hold back, and not do a lot of interviews, because Pacino never does interviews. De Niro never does interviews. And he said, let me tell you something. Pacino can't speak in public, and De Niro can't even speak in private. That's the story.
So your first directorial effort was 1979's Natural Enemies, which unfortunately I haven't been able to see 'cause it's so hard to find. But
okay, well, recently, some guys approached me. They wanted to put out a special edition DVD, I guess.
yeah, Blu-ray.
To do a commentary track and an interview and yada yada yada. And the thing came out when it opened in 1979. Nobody went to see it. It got a couple of decent reviews and a couple of bad reviews, and it was gone. Now it comes back out 40 some odd years later, and everybody thinks it's brilliant. Nobody, maybe 12 people have seen it, but they all like it and they write reviews. So I'm getting all these great reviews 40 years later for that movie. But it was a low budget drama, serious film with good actors, and it was pretty good. It wasn't bad.
I want to ask you, that was your directorial debut. What attracted you to that story? And what was it like as a first-time director working with legends like Hal Holbrook and Louise Fletcher?
Okay, so it was actually not my directorial debut, really, but it was my first respectable one. I had done a couple of softcore pornos in my time.
Well, so did Scorsese.
But we won't talk about those. The first one, I didn't even put my name on it. It's called Mail Order Confidential, and you can find it online if you look for it. It was about a guy who makes porn and sells it, through the mail, and it turns out his wife is his best customer, and he doesn't know it. That's the story of that one. And then about a year later, 1967, I was still doing some trailer work, and one of the companies that I was doing trailer for was called Canon Films, and they were doing pretty much softcore films. And I had just gotten the job of cutting the trailer on The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, Italian Western. So I thought, because I'm really perverse, I thought, what if we made a sort of a softcore Good, the Bad, and the Ugly? So I had a friend who had a ranch or a farm in New Jersey with some horses, and we went and we shot this movie called The Wicked Die Slow. And it was basically The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly with a couple of nude scenes here and there. And that's out in the world too. But yes, Natural Enemies was my first movie. And that was, all right, backing up. I did the trailer and the stuff for One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And that was a great experience. And the movie got all the Oscars. And I was at a party, I guess, right after the Oscars, which I was happy to be invited to. Normally the trailer guy doesn't get invited to that. But I'm standing there at this party and a guy walks up to me and he goes, so what did you do on the movie? Meaning Cuckoo's Nest. I said, oh, I made the trailer. He said, what are you talking about? You made the trailer. The projectionist shows scenes from an upcoming movie. What do you mean you made the trailer? And I thought, okay, so now my dream of being famous is never going to happen as a trailer maker because nobody has any respect for that. I'm the guy who prints the menus. I'm not the chef and I don't own the restaurant. So I realized I got to try to make a movie because I wanted to be somebody, or I wanted to create something. And I happened to come across, not long after that, a book in the bookstore called Natural Enemies. And I read the little book jacket description of the film, and it was basically what's now the opening of the film, a man standing at his bedroom window thinking out loud, and we hear his voiceover, and he basically says, when I get home tonight, I'm going to load my rifle and kill Miriam, Tony, Alex, Sheila, and myself. All men think of killing their families. Some do it, some because they have no choice. So it's this despondent, alienated man in a bad marriage with no communication with his children, and he's deciding to end his life and theirs. For some reason, no one else wanted to make that movie, so I was able to get the rights to it. And we shot that, and the actors that we got were great, because there was a lot of dialogue, and actors like dialogue, and it was a serious subject. And so I got Hal Holbrook, I got Jose Ferrer, Louise Fletcher, who had just won an Oscar. I got this great cast, and we made this movie, and then I really couldn't get it released because people in their right minds don't want to come and see such a depressing thing. So I got it finally released by a small company, and it played for like 2 weeks in New York and a week in LA, and then nowhere after that for forever. But so that was the story of that movie. And I learned a lot. I mean, I thought I knew how to direct because making trailers, I got to direct voiceovers where an announcer would come in and I would say, do it a little faster, or, you know, maybe just a little more intense, or this or that. So I thought I was a director. So I thought, well, so I can direct a movie. It's the same thing, only with pictures. So I started directing that movie, and I realized the very first day that I was way over my head. When Hal Holbrook said to me, "What's this scene about?" And I actually said, "Didn't you read it?" And I realized, oh, he means like, what's the goal of the characters in the scene, or what's the subtext of the scene? He didn't mean he didn't read it. So I felt like an idiot. And then I told the AD, even though I was also the producer of this movie, that I was leaving because I had bitten off more than I could chew, and I got everybody involved, and I shouldn't have. And I tried to walk away, and the AD, who was a big guy, said, "Get back over here. You can't quit now, and you're doing it." So I ended up getting through that. That was my first movie, but I still was doing trailers at that point.
Oh, okay. Well, I have to say, when it comes to your career, one of the things I admire about all of your films is the casting, because you have so many people who were up and comers and went on to greatness, and you got so many, I guess, at the time they were legends, but they were at least still working in like quality projects at the time. So, of course, looking over your career, I have to ask about Kirk Douglas, who you worked with 3 times over your career. First working with him on Eddie Macon's Run. I was wondering, what was like your first impressions of him, or if you know, what were his first impressions of you, that you guys kept a working relationship over the years?
Okay, so I'll tell you this story. I've probably said this before, but it's worth hearing again. I found this book, Eddie Macon's Run. I adapted it to a script. A producer got involved who was pretty powerful and instantly became the boss, even though I had laid out the money for the rights and all. And he came to me. The book was originally about a guy in his 30s who has 2 kids, and he gets in trouble in Texas and goes to prison. And in order to be with his wife and kids, he runs away from Huntsville prison and runs across Texas to Mexico to be with his wife, and all this stuff happens to him along the way. And he's being chased by a guy named Marzak, who works for the Huntsville prison system, but he's really a New Jersey cop who got fired for killing somebody in New Jersey, and it's Kirk Douglas. Now, I wasn't going to hire Kirk Douglas. I was trying to hire Peter Boyle or Gene Hackman, somebody more New Yorkish. But the same producer who is now the boss said, "You're going out to California, and if Kirk Douglas will approve you, he's going to be in the movie." So I went out there, and I met with Kirk, very brief meeting, and he said that he saw my first movie, Natural Enemies, and he liked it, and he's willing to do this movie, and that was that. Now I go back down to Texas where the movie's being shot, and I filmed for like 2 weeks because his scenes were only a part of the movie. And then he shows up on location, and he had sent me a long letter of script notes. And again, out of my inexperience or ignorance, I thought, well, I wrote the script, so I better be able to defend everything that's in it. So he shows up in Texas and he invites me to his hotel room. And I'm sitting there and he says, did you get my note? And I said, yeah, Kirk, I got your note. What do you think? I said, well, I read it all and I have, feelings about all your notes. He goes, I said, you want to go through it now? And he goes, yeah, let's go through it. So we start to go through it. And being a moron, I'm like defending myself on every one of his suggestions. So I go, yeah, I see what you're talking about here, but I don't feel comfortable with that. Next one, I don't think we're going to do that. Get about 5 or 6 in. And I get to a note that says he's a tough New Jersey cop. He's interviewing some young woman in Texas, and it says he's interrogating her. And his note was, I don't want to interrogate her. I want to seduce her. And he was like almost 70 at this point. So I said, yeah, I see what you're saying, Kirk, but I really, and I think all he's trying to do is have a love scene or something. So I say, no, I don't want to do that. And he says, you know something? I've made a few movies. And I'll tell you this, I may not be right all the time, but I'm not wrong all the time either. So why don't you get the fuck out of my hotel room? And he throws me out of his hotel room. So now I think I'm going to get fired, and I've gotten off on a really bad start with Kirk Douglas. But the next morning, which was his first day of work, he makes me ride out to this location in his motorhome. And he says, look, he goes, I saw your first movie. I respect it. I like the script on this movie, but you got a lot to learn. And one of the things is you do not make your actors feel like they can't participate, that you're not going to listen to them, that you're just going to shut down all their suggestions. That's not a good director. So I kind of went, oh. And then he talks about, I said, but that scene where you wanted to, instead of interrogating the woman, you want it to be a seduction. I mean, I don't think this character should sleep with that girl. He goes, you idiot. He goes, I don't mean sleep with her. I mean, instead of bullying her, I should just get it out of her gently. I went, oh. It was like, that was the beginning of our relationship. And after that, I let him be my teacher all the way through that shoot. And one of the things as a producer, he had produced some of his own movies. He said, every night we got to go to the next day's location and figure out what we're doing without the whole crew standing around. I went, really? Because I'm tired and I'd like to go to sleep. He goes, no. You were going to the, so every night we would go to the location and just the two of us, we'd say, all right, here's what's going to happen here. And, this will shoot it like this. And that way there wasn't a whole committee waiting around spending a lot of money for nothing. So that was another thing that I learned from him. And we worked that way. I tried to work that way for the rest of my career. So he was a great teacher and we became good friends. And then after that, we did Tough Guys. And then I did other stuff with him later on. It got to the point where starting in the year 1999 up until now, he's practically the only guy that would ever hire me. So there. Yeah, Kirk was a great guy and a great teacher.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask about life lessons you learned from him, and that certainly is one of them. Now, that leads to another question about Eddie Macon's Run. It's actually a two-part question for you. So I read you didn't want John Schneider for the title role. And my question for you is, who did you want originally? And also, was it purposeful to have the movie more prominent with Kirk Douglas as the star and kind of toning down the John Schneider scenes?
Not really, no. First of all, because it was from a novel, and in the novel, the main character was 30-something years old and had 2 kids. When I was working with this producer, Marty Bregman, he says to me one day, you know who this kid, John Schneider is? I go, yeah, the guy from Dukes of Hazzard? Yeah. He goes, I want him to play Eddie. I go, but he's like 20 years old. He goes, yeah, we'll rewrite the script for him. I go, no. And he does the same thing. He goes, well, you're going down to Atlanta, and if he approves you, he's the star of the movie. So we didn't change the balance of the movie for Kirk Douglas. It's mostly John Schneider's movie, but Kirk, because he's got such presence, feels like it might be his movie.
Yeah.
But it's a younger guy's movie. And John worked out okay. Once I got over my resistance, because I saw him as an older guy and a family man as opposed to almost a kid. but I think we compromised and made him 25 or something like that. But he was okay. And the title song, well, actually, I shouldn't say this. I wrote a title song because I still wanted to be a music guy. I wrote a title song for the movie, and John Schneider recorded it. And he's a really good singer. And I put that under the opening credits of the film. Then when we hired a composer for the rest of the film, a guy named, Jesus, he was with the Steve Miller Band, Norton Buffalo, that was his name.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We hired Norton Buffalo. He was a harmonica player mainly. And he comes on, and I show him the movie, and with the John Schneider song in it, and he doesn't realize that I wrote that song. And he says, well, the first thing we got to do is get rid of that piece of shit you have under the main titles. So he threw out that song, and he wrote his own song. Yeah.
Oh.
And then John Schneider sang, I guess, the second one too. So yes. So it was still his movie. And the main relationship in the movie is between him and his wife and his kid that he's running to. But one of the things that happened was the producer, again, the same guy who was used to like getting his way, he decided that I was also the editor of this movie because I had a lot of editing experience. And he decided that he didn't like the way the movie was edited. It was too slow. What he was really saying is all the scenes with the wife and kids should be cut out because they're boring. It should be an action movie. So I said, no, that would ruin the movie because we got to care about these people in order to be rooting for him to make it to Mexico. And if you don't know how he loves his family, then he's just a guy running away from prison. He says, well, I want to cut a new version of the movie. So we made it sort of a handshake deal. The Directors Guild has a clause, or used to have it, I don't know anymore, where the director gets 10 weeks to cut his version of the movie. And it hadn't been 10 weeks, and he wanted to bring in a new editor to fix the movie that I actually felt was good the way it was. So we shook hands. I said, all right, I'll break the 10-week thing, but you have to agree that we're going to screen your version and my version, and whichever one tests the best, that's the one we're going to finish. So that was the handshake, and that's what we did. And we went to Las Vegas. That's what was his choice. And we had two screenings, a 7 o'clock and a 9 o'clock. The 7 o'clock was his version, where he had cut out most of the scenes with the wife and kid. And then there was my version. They weren't that different from each other, but the audience thought mine was shorter because they were emotionally involved in the story. And they thought his was longer because it was just a bunch of action scenes. And so I got much better scores than he did. So we met in the lobby after the scores were tallied up, and Universal, who was funding it, had their research people there. And I walk up to Bregman, or he walks up to me actually, and I figure he's going to say, okay, you win. And what he says is, I'm going to cut your fucking balls off. And so I was off the picture at that point.
Wow.
Hooray for Hollywood. Anyway. Yeah, and then I went to the head of the studio and I said, listen, it's your money. You have a version A tests better than version B. Why would you finish version B? And he said, he is producing Scarface and he represents Alan Alda and Al Pacino, and I'm not fighting your battles for you. So that was that.
Wow. Oh, man. My question is, again, going back to casting, I've noticed as like with each new project you had, you usually would take an actor sort of with you to the next project, like Revenge of the Nerds. Then you made Gotcha and you had Anthony Edwards, and you had Robert Carradine in Revenge of the Nerds. Then he was in your episode of Alfred Hitchcock Presents. And then you have George DeZundra from Touched by an Angel. And then he's in your movie Adam and Eve, Charles Durning, one of my favorites, Hillary Shepard. But also David Wall, who you seem to work with a lot in your career. Was that usually a coincidence when you moved on to your next project? And since you maybe got along with those actors, you're like, hey, why don't I take somebody I knew?
I think that's pretty much the way things work. A movie is a little bit of a family. And if you find people that you're comfortable with and are talented, you want to work with them again. you know, rather than get out there and you know, try and go after somebody that you've never worked with before, or that might be looking for a more powerful director or whatever. So you tend to build these little units and try to preserve them, because it makes the whole process more fun and more comfortable. I think a lot of people, you know, you'll find Sidney Pollack works with Robert Redford all the time, and I'm sure, you know, Al Pacino works with Sidney Lumet all the time, Dog Day Afternoon and Serpico, and that's what kind of happens, because it's really I always think every movie is like fighting a war, even if it's fun at times, but you're battling against the budget and the schedule and the studio and the marketing, and so it's good to have as many allies as you can to go through this with. So yeah, I mean, yeah, John Goodman was in Eddie Macon's Run, and then I got him to be the coach in Nerds. Sometimes though, like a lot of the guys won't. When Nerds came out, it wasn't considered a prestigious movie. It just happened to hang on and become successful, but people weren't putting that on their resume as, oh yeah, I was in Revenge of the Nerds, and that happens too, you know. But I'm still David Wall. I just saw him last week. I mean, we haven't worked together in a long time, but we stayed friendly, and I would, if I could work again, I'd hire him, even though we're both probably too old for anything really good. But he was in Private Ryan, and he's a really good actor and a good guy. So yeah, and I wouldn't say the same for Burt Lancaster. He didn't like me.
Yeah, we're gonna get to tough guys in a little bit, because we have some questions about that. But how did you go from like something as deadly serious as Natural Enemies to something that's more action-packed like Eddie Macon's Run, and then suddenly you're doing Revenge of the Nerds? Like, this is a huge leap from film to film for you.
Yes, and it wasn't my plan at all, but I did Natural Enemies and nobody saw it. After I did that, I was kind of wounded and didn't know if I'd ever work again. And I don't know if you know this, you probably know it. I happened to talk my way into being the editor of Ordinary People.
Yes.
Okay, so then that was a great experience, and I learned a lot, and it got a lot of praise, and I got more mileage. Even though I didn't direct that movie, I got a lot of career mileage out of having been involved with Ordinary People. But it was a very serious story. And that's kind of where my head was at. I wasn't looking to be a comedy director. And then after Eddie Macon's Run, which was a drama, even though it was a little more of an action drama, but it was still not a comedy, and that bombed. And now I thought, well, my career is kind of over. And I had a friend who I did trailers for when he was a producer, who calls me up one day and he says, you won't believe it, I was just made head of production of 20th Century Fox. I go, you're kidding. He goes, I'm sure I'm going to be fired within a year, but I think I can give jobs to some of my friends while I'm here. So I said, okay, great. So he sent me 3 scripts. One was Bachelor Party. One was a thing about cheerleader camp called Give Me an F. And the last was this thing called Revenge of the Nerds. So the first 2, I read them and I thought, I don't want to do these. The Nerds one, I looked at the title, and back then Nerds wasn't a thing. I mean, it was not in the current vernacular. You're a nerd. Maybe you call somebody a geek, but not a nerd. And I thought, I'm not even going to read this because it sounds stupid. Then I thought, well, my friend is the only guy that's possibly going to hire me, so I better read it. So I read Nerds, and within the first few pages, I realized, oh my God, I recognize this. The first day I got to college, I felt like all these people are friends except for me. And I went to my room and closed the door, and I thought, that's it. I'm not going to ever be comfortable here. So I understand the whole sense that the nerds get when they get to the campus and they feel people don't want to be with them. So I said, I think I could probably do this Nerds thing. He says, okay, well, there's a problem. The producers have seen your other movies and they don't even want to talk to you. I said, oh, really? He says, but I'm going to force them to take a meeting with you. So you better, do the best you can in that meeting. So and at the time I was in New York and I was teaching a class, oddly enough, at Columbia, the school that had kicked me out. Because I couldn't not do that. I mean, how do you not take a teaching job at some place that don't remember that they kicked you out 5 years ago? So I'm teaching this class and I take a day off and I fly out to LA and I doing whatever homework I can on the plane about the, how you have to come up with a sort of a verbal pitch about your vision of the movie, which, you can do on certain kinds of movies, but if it's a comedy, it's kind of hard to like tell them you're going to make a new kind of comedy. No, it's a movie about a bunch of geeky guys and they get picked on and yada, yada, yada. So anyway, I don't know what I made up in that night before the meeting, but it must have been okay, because I go in the meeting and we meet for a long time and seem to hit it off with the producers who didn't want to talk to me. And I fly back to New York and my friend calls and he says, "What happened at the meeting?" He already knew, but I didn't know that. I said, "Oh, well, I think it really went really well. And we spent like 2 hours and I think, we connected and I think, it was a good meeting." He goes, "Yeah, you made one mistake." I go, "Oh, what?" He goes, "You said Risky Business is a better movie than Animal House." I said, "Well, I love Animal House, but yeah, Risky Business is a better movie. I mean, it's not as silly and it has more texture and better performances. I mean, it's not just jokes." He says, "So what kind of a movie are you going to make here?" And I said, "The best movie I can from this script." He goes, "You're not answering me. What kind of a movie are you going to make here?" And now I realize I'm on speakerphone and I bet the other guys are in the room there. So I say, "Look, I'm going to make this script is more like Animal House, and I'm going to make the best version of this script that I can. And because of the script, it's going to be more like Animal House." He goes, "What kind of a movie are you going to make?" And I said, I know you want me to go, "Animal House, sir." And I go, "But I just want to make it, I don't want it to be a cartoon. I want the characters to be real so people can relate to them and that'll make the movie better." He says, "I want you to make a movie that not only will it play in Cinema 2, which was an art house in New York, where oddly enough, where Natural Enemies had played. He goes, "Not only will it not play in Cinema 2, but you'll never be allowed in there again." I go, "Okay." I go, "I tell you what, Joe, when I flew out to do my audition, I said to my class, I'm flying to LA tomorrow. I'm going to miss class because I'm going to audition for the job directing a stupid teenage comedy." And he goes, "Now we're talking." And I said, "How about this? I'll make a movie that I'm ashamed to put my name on." He goes, "You got the job."
Oh man. Well, obviously the movie is legendary, but my question for you at the time, I'm sure as a director, you're always hoping that, the movie will be a success, but were you prepared for it to be that successful that it ended up becoming?
No, absolutely not. First of all, none of the actors wanted to be in it because they thought it was going to be, a cartoon. And I had to keep promising them, "No, we're going to keep them real. And, we want people to relate." So Bobby didn't want to do it. Anthony didn't want to do it. Booger tells the story. I've seen him tell this story. And he even wrote a book called Revenge of the Nerds about how, and one of the chapters was how in absolutely no way would he ever play the role of Booger. And he told his agent, "If they offer me Booger, say no." But he took it. But Tim Busfield didn't want to be. Everybody thought this potentially could be an embarrassment. But because of that, we all tried to keep it real, and it was very collaborative, and everybody, had input and ideas, and we ended up making the movie. The jokes were still there, but the relationships and the characters were kind of reality based. So, and people seemed to relate to it, and I think that's why it was successful. It wasn't just a bunch of stupid pratfalls and dirty jokes. But my friend was right. He got fired before the movie came out as head of the studio. And the new guy came in and he saw the movie. And I was in a restaurant one day and the guy walks up to me and says, "Hey, I hear your movie's a piece of shit." And I go, "Oh, really? Where'd you hear that?" He goes, "Norman Levy. That's the new head of the studio." I think, oh, okay, so we're in trouble. And they did their best. Like it was supposed to open in like 1,000 theaters. They cut it down to 100. And they were supposed to spend a lot of money during the '64 Olympics advertising Revenge of the Nerds. They cut way back on the advertising. But somehow the movie just came out and people found it and it stayed alive and it grew and grew and it became this thing. after which I couldn't get a job directing a serious film anymore.
Wow.
Is there a reason why, like, well, obviously the cast came back for the sequels, but you didn't.
Except Anthony. Anthony didn't want to do another Nerds movie, so he wasn't in the second one. They shot a dream sequence where he appears and Carradine sees him, and they have a little moment, but he didn't want to be in that movie.
Okay.
Just out of curiosity, because this is kind of a burning question for us for a very long time. Do you talk to Larry B. Scott? Do you still have connections with him? Because we've been wanting to get him on the show and talk about his career.
Oh, you should be able to do that. My son, who I told you about, is going to get assassinated in Nashville. When he was in L.A., he had this kind of a thing, a podcast.
Mm-hmm.
It was called Let's Get Digital. And one day he reassembled Larry Scott, Busfield, Carradine, not Anthony, and Booger. And they were his guests on the show. And Larry loves being associated with it. They did a couple of more sequels as television movies.
Mm-hmm.
And he's pretty accessible and loves to talk about it. So, and they do Comic-Con. They all do Comic-Con. So you should be able to get them.
Yeah,
we've been trying.
Well,
yeah.
give me I'll say they want that you guys want to talk to him if you want.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Larry's great, and Larry's biggest problem, and he talks about this. They did a new issue of the Revenge of the Nerds DVD, and there's a behind the scenes. I think it's called I'm a Nerd and I'm proud of it, and it's the actors and me all on camera talking about their experience making the movie. And Larry B, his main problem was he played Lamar so well as a gay man, he had to prove himself to any women, and he wasn't. That nobody would believe him that he was straight. He had to really work hard to prove himself. We can talk about that.
So, one thing that stands out about some of your 80s films are your soundtracks, from the Gotcha soundtrack, Tough Guys, you had Nasty Boys by Janet Jackson. Like, you had a good collection of 80s music that you threw in. I want to know, how did you get the rights for Thriller for Revenge of the Nerds? Because that had to be pretty expensive to get the okay for that party scene.
Okay, so in Nerds, because my friend hadn't been fired yet, I knew how important the music was going to be. And when I put the movie together, the first cut, I used those songs thinking we'd have to replace them, which we did have to replace some, but for some reason they gave us enough money. I think Thriller cost $35,000, and Burning Down the House, same thing, $35,000. And the studio could have come and said, you can't use that, we don't want to spend that much, but they went for it. And nowadays, I don't know what, I haven't done a film in a while, so I don't know what things like that would cost, but some of them the one song I know I never was able to get was Happy Birthday.
Yeah, I had that issue a while back.
but the other stuff, I was really lucky to get some of that stuff.
Donald Gibb, was he really as intimidating in real life as he was in the film?
The answer is yes and no. Yes, when he first walks in, and no once you get to know him. He's a really sweet guy, good guy, funny guy. But when I was casting, he had already hired our stunt coordinator. And one day I'm waiting to do some casting, and the stunt coordinator walks in with this guy, big guy with a beard. And I say, hey, how you doing? And he goes, hey, I want you to meet Don Gibb. I think he could play Ogre. And I go, I don't know, because he looked 40 to me. I said, yeah, I don't know, I think, and Gibb is standing right there. I said, I think he's a little older than a college, freshman or sophomore level guy. I'm sure you're great, but I just don't feel like you'd be right for it age-wise. He goes, I'll be right back. And he leaves the room, goes into the men's room, shaves off his beard, cuts himself, comes back in, and he says, what do you think? And I think, well, now I got to hire this fucking guy. He just shaved off his beard, he cut himself. I want to live some more. So I hired him. I get a call I tell the casting director, and she was wanting an actor named, damn it, I can't remember this guy's name. Clancy Brown.
Oh, okay.
Wow.
He wanted Clancy Brown. Now Clancy was good, solid actor, but he wasn't as big and imposing as Gibb.
Yeah.
And I felt like I'm going to gamble on Gibb. So she said to me, "All right, not 100% serious." She says, "I think you're making a mistake, and I want my credit to read casting by Susan Arnold, except for Ogre." But he was great and fun.
Well, I want to thank you for casting Linda Fiorentino in Gotcha, because she has fueled my on-screen crush for decades. When you were making that film, were you leaning towards trying to make something maybe a little more, I guess, serious after Revenge of the Nerds? Or did the studio more want you to lean more into the comedic elements of the story?
No, after Nerds, because it was successful,
Mm-hmm.
The first studio was 20th Century Fox, while my friend was still working there. Once he got fired, the new management came in and decided they didn't want to make Gotcha. And I called into a room with the new head of production, a guy named Larry Gordon, who was a nice guy. And he goes, "Look," because I knew him I made trailers for some of his movies. He said, "Listen, we're not going to make this movie, and we could just put it in our vault, but I want to give you the opportunity to take it somewhere else. So yeah, I'm going to put it in turnarounds and see if you can get another studio involved, because we're not making it." Okay, so we move it over to Universal. They decided, for whatever reason, they wanted to make it. But we still had a casting question. I wanted to use Anthony Edwards, and the first studio tried to get me to use Tom Cruise or Johnny Depp. And I had to fight that off because I wanted to work with Anthony. And he seemed so right, because Tom Cruise had just fucked Rebecca De Mornay on screen. So
Yeah.
how's he going to play a weirgin? And, Johnny Depp was in Nightmare on Elm Street or something. He seemed a little strange to me. He still does. And I wanted to work with Anthony. So the new studio also resisted Anthony a little bit, and they tried to get me to hire a guy named Craig Sheffer, who's because he's like handsome face or something.
Yeah.
I didn't use him, but I had to agree we audition both guys on tape. Now I bring the audition to the studio, and they call in secretaries. This really happened. 5 or 6 secretaries into the room. They watch the 2 auditions, and they say, "Who do you think should play the lead in this movie?" And they all voted for Anthony, because he seemed cute, and they wanted, they felt sympathetic towards him as opposed to this studly looking guy. So that's how Anthony got the part. The role of Sasha, which Linda played, was written in the script as an actual Czechoslovakian actress, and we were only seeing European actresses. Then part of the process of hiring Anthony, they made me go look at a movie because they wanted me to look at Matthew Modine. So I went to look at a movie called Vision Quest. And Matthew, I wasn't that impressed with him, although he was okay. I still wanted to work with Anthony, but there was this girl in that movie. She had like curly hair, and she was really interesting, and that was Linda. So I went to New York on some casting trip on Gotcha, and I asked if I could meet Linda Fiorentino. She was making After Hours with Scorsese at the time. So sure enough, she comes in, and I meet her, and I think I really like her, but I mean, I don't want to have an American actress with a phony accent. I'm going to get killed for that, because not everybody's as good as Meryl Streep at having fake accents. So I say to her, "You think you could do a Czech accent?" She goes, "I'll go talk to my dialogue coach. I'll come back in a couple of days, and I'll tell you if I think I can do it." She goes away, she comes back, and she does what you see in the movie. And I think it's really great. But I just know that the press or somebody's going to go, "Why would this jerk hire an American actress to play this role?" And then I was working with the writer, and I said, "Why don't we change the ending so that it turns out she's not really Czechoslovakian, that she's a CIA and she's faking the accent?" So we did that, and no one ever questioned it. No one ever said, "Oh, it's a bad accent" or anything, because we kind of admitted that she was not really Czech. And so Linda did her thing, and she was great. I loved what she did in that movie.
Yeah, she was fantastic. Anthony Edwards is great in that film. And that actually leads to a question I have, because I've heard the story in the commentary, which I bought the Blu-ray for Christmas and rewatched it again. How was it supposed to end had that twist not occur?
I guess she never shows up again after East Berlin.
Hmm.
Wow.
But now, because she was CIA, she gets to be in Act 3.
Right.
So
Yes.
yeah, so it must be that.
Yeah, Gotcha is definitely one of my favorite films. That's actually how I first heard about you, and then knew, oh, this guy did Revenge of the Nerds and all these films. And one thing I've noticed with Gotcha, Tough Guys, Nerds, and even Troop Beverly Hills, you have this way about doing stories about underdogs. In this case, people that are sort of, whether they're the nerds or in Tough Guys, two guys from the 50s who have to adapt to life in the 80s and they're too old to adjust. Is that like kind of an intentional thing that you go for stories that are about underdogs, or is it just a coincidence?
Okay, that's a good question. The honest answer is I never thought of it as that this is my message. I want to make movies about underdogs, but I did keep, like when I related to the nerds arriving at school and being rejected, that was a personal relation. Gotcha, I didn't think of Jonathan as an underdog. He was just more like a fish out of water, guy in trouble. Tough Guys, again, it was about, I guess they were underdogs, but really they were powerful. But it was more about guys who come out of prison and they can't adjust to the modern world. Troop Beverly Hills, they were definitely underdogs, even though they were wealthy underdogs. In fact, Jerry Weintraub, the producer, even though he was making the movie, and I just got on that movie, I didn't develop the script really. I got on that movie. There's a whole long story about why I ended up doing that movie, but I did it because I had read it at one point and passed, and then I had a problem, and by a year or two later, I felt like I needed to have a hit, and I thought maybe that would be a hit because of the Girl Scouts or whatever. But we had a table read of the script, and we had cast. I mean, Shelley was there before I was. She had to approve me. I cast all the girls and Hillary Shepard, and we had a problem casting her husband because the studio head was tennis buddies with George Hamilton or somebody like that. So he offered the part to George Hamilton, and Shelley and I heard that and said, no, that's no good. And we went back and forth, and then finally we cast Craig T. Nelson, never even having read him or met him or anything. We just cast him from a headshot. This guy's pretty good. Let's use him. That's how we got him. But then now we have a table read, and Jerry Weintraub, who's a pretty macho guy, whatever, he got bored during the reading. And about 15, 20 minutes into the reading, he gets up and he walks out of the room. The actors finish reading the script, and then the word comes down, we got to have a new script. This is like a few weeks before shooting.
Wow.
What do you mean a new script? Yeah, Jerry doesn't like the script anymore, and we got to do a rewrite. So he hires some friend of his to do a rewrite. And one of the things that he says is, nobody's going to root for the rich girls. So we can't have them be the underdog, because everybody's going to want them to fail. But for some reason, all of us that were actually making the film understood that no, once you establish them as the outcasts, then that's their obstacle, and they can come back and they can win, and you'll root for them. So we had a little battle about that, and I was appointed by the producers, who we were all on the same side except for Jerry, who was the studio, and they made me the mouthpiece to come in and say, no, we're going to go with the old script that we all committed to. We're not going to go with this new thing that you wrote. And somehow I didn't get fired at that point because I had the backing of Shelley and the producers. So, but it set up a bad dynamic for the making of the movie, because the producer was like pissed at me for not rolling over. And that we had a number of incidents, but we got through it, and the movie came out and died. And then years later, girls discovered it in Blockbuster or whatever, and it grew and grew, and now it's a thing. You know, it became a thing.
Yeah, we'll talk about a sequel, I heard.
Yeah, I've read that.
I don't know if it's going to happen. I mean, that they throw this stuff all the time. You know, to say, oh, they're going to remake this or do a sequel to that in Hollywood.
Yes, but you know, I mean, this friend of mine, they're friends of mine now. One day I get a call saying, "Did you hear about this theater musical based on Troop Beverly Hills?" I go, well, "No, what?" There's a dinner theater in Hollywood somewhere, the Rockwell Theater, and they're doing a series of things called unauthorized musical parody of this movie, that movie. And one of the things they did was Troop Beverly Hills. And I thought, oh, that's probably going to suck. I went to see it. It was great. It was great. It was better than the movie. I mean, because they didn't have to get the rights because it's like a parody. They had all these songs, popular songs that they put into the story. And the story was told in a much more silly, crazy way. It was great. I went and see it 5 times. And now the people that did that are doing a thing on Broadway, same kind of thing based on Titanic.
Oh, I heard about that.
Right. And that's the same woman who played Phyllis Neffler in the Rockwell in LA is now playing Celine Dion on Broadway and doing great.
Wow.
Man. Speaking of Troop Beverly Hills, again, I'm going back to another casting question. How was your experience, I guess, directing more, even though they're professional child actors, but kind of novice performers on screen, like Carla Gugino was her big film debut. Did you have to work a little more extra hard with the younger cast, or was it just like any other production? They knew what to do.
Yeah, they were all pros. I mean, they must have done enough episodic TV or whatever. They were all good, and you know, their parts were pretty simple. You know, there's there's Carla's the neglected one, and Jenny Lewis, you know, has her parents that are getting divorced, and it was all pretty kind of thumbnails of life, but they were all really good. Really, I loved working with those girls. Tasha, the girl who sings the cookie song.
Yes.
Great. Yeah. No, it was a great experience. It wasn't like working. I didn't have to struggle. Like, you know, if you got on Eddie Macon's Run, we had to do some local casting in Laredo where we were making the movie, and there was the role of the little boy who was John Schneider's kid. And they didn't want to pay to bring a young kid actor down from New York. You'll find someone in Texas. And so we did some local casting, and I found this kid who was very cute, but he had no experience, or maybe he had done one thing. And when it came to the day of the shoot, he was supposed to, Kirk Douglas is there capturing and arresting his dad, and he was supposed to run up to Kirk Douglas and, you know, pound him on the legs and, you know, say, "Let go of my dad."
Yeah.
The kid kept smiling the whole time. And I had to say, cut. I would say, you know, he's smiling. I said, can you like not smile? I talked to his dad. Dad, tell him not to smile. Tell him he's supposed to be really angry at this man who's arresting his dad. He couldn't make him stop smiling. The dad says to me, just before the take, hit him. I go, what do you mean? Just hit him in the butt. I go, no, I can't do that. He says, you can do it. You can do it. His own dad. So I go, roll the camera, roll sound, and I hit the kid in the butt, and I go, action. And he's all kind of disoriented, and he's not smiling. So we got the take. But there was nothing like that. I didn't have to do any tricks with those girls. Those girls were all great.
Thankfully. Also, that was really Betty Thomas's last acting role before she went on to a noted directing career. By any chance, was she like asking you questions, taking notes, shadowing you, or anything like that?
I would say no. She was already directing some theater, and she maybe had directed some. What was that? L.A. Law? No,
she was doing Hill Street Blues.
Hill Street Blues. No, I don't think I wasn't being her teacher on that.
Okay.
No.
You weren't her mentor.
No, and in fact, she grew. I was told, because we didn't like hang out, that she hated the movie. because she felt like she was over the top. Even though, and she was a little bit big in that character, but it worked for me and it worked for the film, and people like that now. But then she got used to it. So I met her. We both showed up at the same performance of the unauthorized musical parody, and now she likes it.